Today it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Nathan Jones. Prior to that, I want to thank our usual suspects, the CoLab for co-sponsoring, our division, marketing, and video services. My normal partner in crime, Michael Carriger, could not be here today, but he skipped out because he knows the words are hard to pronounce. So this is Dr. Nathan Jones has been teaching at JCCC for almost 20 years. And prior to that, he taught English in Taiwan for 15 years, 12 years at National Tsinghua University, and 3 years at the International Trade Institute of the China External Trade Development Council. He likes to earn his degrees in pairs. He has a PhD in English from Indiana University and an ED from Washington State University, 2 masters, one in humanities from California State University and one in English from Washington State University. And then his last pair, 2 BAs, one in mass communications from Evergreen State College and the other in China Regional Studies at the University of Washington. Currently, his research interests include visual rhetoric of post-colonial resistance in East Asia. He's an active member of the Filipino Association of Greater Kansas City, and his personal interests include beekeeping, adopting a lot of animals that wander into his acreage, and learning to be a father to Alexander, the star back there, along with, actually, he's smart enough to let Bernadette do a lot. Okay. The book today is Noli Me Tángere. Thank you. Hugely popular in the Philippines. Children study an abbreviated form of it in elementary school and study it at length in college. Some consider Jose Rizal to be the first Filipino because of his recognition of Filipino identity, insistence on equal rights for Filipinos, and outspoken resistance to colonialism. As a European American married to a Filipina, Nathan feels the need to understand Rizal as a way to understand Filipino culture. Sadly, many Americans have never heard of this author or this work, but that changes today.
Oh, thank you, Maureen, very much. I'd like to begin this talk with an anecdote, and that is to go back into time at the beginning of the 20th century when the Philippines was still a Spanish colony. Actually, the Americans were fighting a war against the Spanish, and then the Philippines became an American colony. And during this war, there was another war that actually followed that. The Filipinos were fighting the American army for 3 years because they wanted independence. There were a group of people who were fighting the Americans, and these were the Filipino soldiers. They didn't have modern weapons like the US Army had. They had farm implements, which they had fashioned into crude weapons. And in spite of this disadvantage that they had on the battlefield, they managed to inflict some serious losses on US forces. The Filipinos would wait until the American soldiers would be going through a mountain pass or on a jungle trail, and they would suddenly emerge from behind rocks and out of trees and engage the US forces at close combat. Using machetes, they were able to inflict serious life-threatening injuries, fatal injuries on American soldiers. And it was amazing to the US Army that people with such limited weaponry were able to do this kind of damage. The American officers at that time used to carry a .38 caliber sidearm, the one on the left. It was a revolver. The officers in the hand-to-hand combat would actually unload that .38 caliber revolver into the torso of an attacking Filipino soldier, and yet the soldiers still came in with their machetes and they were able to inflict lethal blows on the officer. The War Department became so alarmed by this trend that they decided that they needed to upgrade sidearms carried by officers, and they went with the .45 caliber as a result. The reason I share this with you is because it took incredible courage and determination for these Filipino soldiers to confront the US Army and to do this in such a decisive way. And you might ask the question, why did the Filipino soldiers fight so bravely and tenaciously for their independence? And part of it can be explained by a simmering desire under 333 years of Spanish colonialism to have their own country. But part of it also can be explained by this book, which I'm talking about today, and that's Noli Me Tángere by Jose Rizal. Rizal was the catalyst for the Philippine Revolution. Now, this novel can be examined in two different ways. One is a love story between two people that emanates throughout this. But the other level we can understand it is as a country's fight for its independence. And Rizal actually makes that very clear in the introduction of his book, because he clearly states that this is to be interpreted and read as a political novel, not just as a romance. And if I can find that here very quickly. He says, "To my country, recorded in the history of human suffering are cancers of such malignant character that even minor contact aggravates them, engendering overwhelming pain. How often in the midst of modern civilization have I wanted to bring you into the discussion, sometimes to recall these memories, sometimes to compare you to other countries, so often that your beloved image became to me like a social cancer. Therefore, because I desire your good health, which is indeed all of ours, and because I seek better stewardship for you, I will do with you what the ancients did with their infirmed. They placed them on the steps of their temple so that each in his own way could invoke a divinity that might offer a cure. With that in mind, I will try to reproduce your current condition faithfully, without prejudice. I will lift the veil hiding your ills and sacrifice everything to truth, even my own pride, since, as your son, I too suffer from your defects and shortcomings." Now, Rizal was trained as an ophthalmologist, and he noticed that with the eye, there were certain cancers that were so painful that if you were to touch it, it would cause extreme pain for the person who had it. And these were called touch-me-not cancers. And that's what he referred to in this book. Noli Me Tángere is translated into touch-me-not. And he's exploring a cancer that he sees in Philippine society, and that is the legacy of colonialism and how to get rid of it. And so that's really kind of what this novel is about. But there is a love story included in it. Okay, so first of all, let's briefly take a look at the Philippines. I know a lot of times Americans are not totally familiar with it. So I'd like to just take a brief look at the history of the Philippines. Second, we'll take a look briefly at the life of Jose Rizal, a man who is extremely important for Philippine culture and in the Philippines, a man who perhaps isn't so well known here in the US. And then I'd like to take a look at Noli Me Tángere as an example of resistance literature. And then finally, consider Noli's legacy in the Philippines as well as internationally. Okay, we often think of the Philippines as getting started when Magellan showed up, the Portuguese explorer bringing Spanish ships and showing up in the 16th century. But actually, there was much more to the Philippines than the arrival of the Portuguese under Magellan. Early Filipino settlers were fishermen, farmers, hunters, and traders. They had their own society in the Philippines. The Philippines is an archipelago of 7,000 islands, and the people who lived on these islands were arranged or organized in what were often called barangays, which consisted of about 150 to 200 people. So we're not talking about people who were uncivilized or unaware of what was going on throughout the world. They had trade, they had contact, they had communications with surrounding countries, including China as well as India, and also from the Arab countries, because there were Muslim missionaries who arrived in the southern part of the Philippines and established Muslim congregations there. So this existed for several thousand years. Then a gentleman by the name of Magellan showed up in the Philippines at an island called Mactan. And he decided that he wanted to claim the Philippines as Spain's colony. And he named the Philippines, he dedicated it to King Philip II, who was a prince at that time. But he says, in Philip's honor, we should call it the Philippines. That's how it got its name. And the problem with Magellan is that he was trying to play one tribe off against another as a way to divide and rule. And as a result, there was a Filipino tribal chieftain named Lapu-Lapu who didn't want to have anything to do with this. And he basically killed Magellan, not basically, he killed Magellan in Mactan, okay? And that put an end to Magellan's escapades in the Philippines. News of this atrocity from the Spanish point of view reached Spain, and then about 30, 40 years later, they sent another armada to the Philippines. They were determined that they were going to bring these people to heel and that the Philippines would become a Spanish colony. And they did that. Spain ruled the Philippines for a total of 333 years. You know, let that sink in. The Philippines was a Spanish colony for 333 years. And so all the people who ruled the Philippines, the education system, everything was set up under Spanish control. Spain benefited tremendously through this colony because it found slaves in the Philippines. There was a very active slave trade. Filipinos were captured and sent to Mexico, where they worked on farms and things like that in Mexico. Minerals were exported from the Philippines, timber. Christian converts were found by the Catholic Church. And the Manila-Acapulco galleon trade, where they would import things from China and places like that and then export them to Mexico and also the west coast of the United States, were very lucrative for the Spanish. So they benefited quite a bit by having these Philippine colonies for over 300 years. Now, during this occupation, the rule was rather brutal, as you'll find out in this novel. Rizal talks about it at depth. And Jose Rizal grew up as a upper-class Filipino gentleman in an upper-class family, and he benefited from the educational opportunities that were afforded the rich, wealthy Filipinos who could go to school and do all the things that poor Filipinos, the majority of people, could not. He was the son of wealthy landowners. He became a medical doctor and was actually an ophthalmologist, and he was very successful. He performed cataract surgeries in the early part of the 20th century at a time when many people weren't able to do this. He was doing this type of surgery in the Philippines. He studied for 10 years in Europe and became fluent in several languages. It's said that he spoke and wrote at least 6 European languages, including Tagalog. So he was a very well-educated and very intelligent man. Now, there were 2 things about Rizal that you'll find in his novels that comes through very, very clearly. And this got under the skin of the Spanish governors. Number 1, he believed that there should be legal equality between Filipinos and Spaniards. Because Philippines was a colony of Spain, had been a colony for 300 years, he felt that Filipinos should be treated as equals to the Spanish. And along that lines, legally, he felt that the Philippines should become a province of Spain. And he often referred to Spain as the mother country. So he wasn't like trying to throw out all the Spanish. He just wanted the Philippines to be treated equally and with respect. Now, I'd like to shift over to discuss the actual novel itself and take a look at it from these perspectives. Let's talk briefly about the setting of the novel, the characters of the novel, the plot, the narrative structure, and then also the theme. Now, through this novel, he presents what the situation was like living in the Philippines at that time. And also he presents to us a love story, and it shows the trials and tribulations that these people had to go through to follow their love in this novel. Okay, Noli's setting. You can see on the left, this is an upper-class Filipinos family. They're living the good life. It's very Castilian, very Spanish. You can see this in the clothing. They would learn Spanish as their ideal language. They would probably speak Tagalog, which is a native language, but about 1/3 of Tagalog is based on Spanish, and they would emulate many aspects of European life. The children would go to Europe to study, often to Spain, and so they tried to be as Spanish as possible. On the right side, you would see how it was like in the countryside. People may not speak Tagalog. They probably don't know very much Spanish. and opportunities for education for them would be very, very limited. The ones on the right were the ones that Rizal was very, very concerned about. Okay, so here are the main characters. This novel, it's about 400 pages long. And Rizal, this was his first novel, the first novel that he attempted to write. Actually, it's quite surprising that he did so well with it. He's got about 30 main characters in here, and characters appear in the beginning and they sort of disappear, and then over time they come back again. And so as you're reading this, you want to take very careful notes of it as it develops, because it's actually quite complex. But the ones that I'm going to focus on today are Crisostomo Ibarra. He's the young man who goes from the Philippines, a wealthy young man. He goes to Spain to study for 10 years and then comes back to the Philippines. And he discovers that something very bad has happened to his father. His father got on the bad side of a Catholic friar in their small town of what is called San Diego, which is a fictional town in the Philippines. And his father's put in jail. And so Ibarra wants to try to find out what happens to his father, because he discovered not only was his father put in jail, but his father died in jail, and he can't even find his father's body. So this becomes the main plot of the actual novel itself. But then we have several subplots which develop out of this. Maria Clara is a young lady. She becomes the love interest of Ibarra. And Maria Clara is from a wealthy Filipino family, and she is sort of the stereotypical ideal Filipina. She's very devoted to her man, and she's very loyal to the church, and she's very beautiful, and she's the type of woman that many men would want to have, particularly at that time. Captain Tiago is Maria's father. Captain Tiago is a very well-respected Filipino who lives in the town, and everybody looks up to him. He's very conscious of his social status and his prestige. And his wife is Donna Pia Alba. Donna Pia Alba is a very sad character in this story. As I mentioned, she's married to Captain Tiago, and she has a child, and her child is Maria Clara. But the parentage of Maria Clara is a little problematic. You see, Captain Tiago and Donna Pia Alba tried very desperately to have children for quite a long time and were unable to do that. But when Maria Clara goes on a retreat with Friar Padre Damaso, she becomes pregnant. And when she returns, they discover that probably that baby belongs to the friar. And instead of calling out the friar for his unprofessional, unethical conduct, everybody tries to cover it up because they do not want to get on the bad side of the church. Padre Damaso is the friar, the main friar of this town. He runs the show. The political leadership are very much subservient to him, and the Filipinos show him great deference, and if they don't, they pay a terrible price. Elias is a revolutionary. He's kind of like what you would expect to see on the right. He comes from a very poor family, a family that's been persecuted over time, but he becomes a revolutionary. He wants to basically overthrow the Spanish and get them out. And physically, he's a very strong, strapping young man and very eager to do great things. And then Tasio is a very reflective person. He's sort of like a professor in the sense that he sort of looks at human nature and understands human trends, and he sort of serves as a counselor for Ibarra as Ibarra goes about trying to figure out what happened to his dad and how he can gain the hand of his love, which is Maria Clara, in the process. So that's sort of an overview. All right, so let's take a little bit in-depth look at these characters. Ibarra is the mestizo son of wealthy parents. He studied in Europe for 7 years. He's engaged to Maria Clara. He actually is a very good heart. He tries to find his father, but his father was put in jail. He dies in jail. Nobody knows where the father was even buried. It was rumored that he was buried with the Chinese in the Chinese cemetery, which for this society is a huge insult because they look down on Chinese people. He finds out that his father was not buried with the Chinese at all. His body was thrown into a lake. And Ibarra is just shocked that they would treat his father in this way. What was his father's crime for being thrown in jail? He had not gone to confession the way he was supposed to. He had not attended church regularly, and he had made a disparaging comment about Friar Damaso, and that was enough to get him into trouble. But anyway, Ibarra is searching for his father, trying to figure out what's going on. In the process of this, he establishes a local school, a public school for poor children. He defends his father's reputation whenever he has the opportunity to speak up for his father in public. And this gets him into trouble with Padre Damaso, because when the school was being opened at a ceremony, Padre Damaso stands up and criticizes Ibarra's father and says that, well, it's nice that we have a school here, but it's too bad that some Filipinos are so selfish that they actually go to jail and they die in prison and they just create problems in society. Ibarra gets very angry at this. He attacks Padre Damaso and almost kills him. But just in the nick of time, his girlfriend, Maria Clara, shows up. She grabs his arm, pulls the knife away from him, and says, "Don't kill him." Well, Padre Damaso is very embarrassed by this situation. He's humiliated. He is determined to get Ibarra one way or the other. And so he excommunicates Ibarra from the church, which is a huge problem, not just spiritually, but also socially. Who wants to work with somebody who's been excommunicated in a town as tightly knit as San Diego was at that time? And they eventually, a friend of Ibarra's has this excommunication order overturned through Manila, and instead Padre Damaso has him put in jail, and his crime for being put in jail is because of some correspondence he had written to his girlfriend, and he'd made a disparaging comment about the church, and so they said that he was guilty of sedition, and this was the reason for them to have him put in jail. He eventually escapes from prison and is on the lam, and that's when this novel ends. This is the beautiful Maria Clara. She's the one who is engaged to Ibarra. All throughout his time in Europe, she writes to him frequently, and they fall in love through the conversations on letter. She is required to take all of these letters and surrender them to Father Damaso, because Father Damaso, basically the priests threaten her. They say, if you don't give us the letters that you sent to Ibarra and that he sent to you, so that we can go through them and find the information we need, we will tell everybody in the town who your real father is and who your real father isn't. At that point in time, Father Damaso had already left, so the priests in there didn't really care. So she is horrified. Maria Clara doesn't want the town to know that her mother had had an affair with this friar. And so she hands over all of Ibarra's letters to the clergy. They then are able to find and pick and choose some sentences that they use to convict Ibarra and have him put into jail for sedition. Ibarra is eventually springed from jail through his friend Elias in a prison break. He goes on the run. And after her love interest is gone, he's on the run, Maria Clara decides, you know what? I love Ibarra. I do not love any other man. I'm not going to get married to another man. She tells her parents, Father Tiaga, or her father, Captain Tiaga, that I'm not going to get married. I'm going to become a nun. And so from that time forward, she goes into the clergy. Okay, Captain Tiago is the father of Maria Clara. He's a wealthy Filipino landowner. He's the husband of Dona Pia Alba, the adoptive father of Maria Clara, but they convince everybody in town that he's actually the real father. He knows that he's not the real father, but he pretends to be the real father. They want to protect the reputation of their family and also the reputation of the priest. Widely respected, and they tried to hide throughout their lives Maria Clara's biological father's real identity. And this is a very tragic character. Dona Pia Alba, she's the wife of Captain Tiago. She struggles to conceive a child with Captain Tiago. She is touched by Padre Damaso. We're not quite sure in the novel if it's a rape or if she's seduced by him, but in any event, it's an inappropriate relationship between a married woman and a friar. Definitely a no-no. And she gives birth to a child in childbirth, and she dies in, well, wait a minute now. Yeah, she dies in childbirth, but I'm sorry, I get this confused. She died in childbirth, but the baby lives, and the baby is Maria Clara, okay. It gets a little confusing because when you take a look at the novel and you look at Rizal's life, there's a lot of parallels between. It's easy to get them confused. Okay, this is the evil guy. This is Padre Damaso. He's a friar. He's the representative of the Catholic Church and the Christian faith in Santiago. Now, in spite of the fact that he's done some terrible things to people, such as making, getting that one lady pregnant and all of that, she dies in childbirth, and they cover up, his identity as they raise the child as another man's child. He actually is very tender towards Maria Clara. He's interested in her. He still hears confession from her. He takes an interest in helping her become a nun because that's what she wants to do. So although I think most people would say that he's probably a pretty evil guy, there is a little bit of goodness in him. Not a lot, but a little bit. But you can see the power of the priests as described by Rizal here. This gentleman is famous for walking through San Diego with a cane. And it was very important to him that everybody attend Mass and go to confession regularly. And if he found somebody out on the street, particularly what they call an Indio or local Filipino, someone with dark skin, he would pull his cane out and start beating them if they hadn't been to Mass and gone to confession. And as you read the book, you begin to understand that going to confession was very important for the priests. There is the issue of the theology behind it, going to confession to get forgiveness of sins, but on a practical level, going to confession revealed the weaknesses of the individual so that they could then be manipulated, according to Rizal, for the interests of the friars to keep their control. Okay, the next major character is Elias. He is a poor Filipino. Originally, his family had money, but his father was accused of a crime of arson, which was false, and the family goes on the run. At one point, his grandmother becomes a prostitute, and it's the only way she can survive and support the family. So, his family heritage is not the greatest in terms of society at that time. He works as a boatman, and he's very smart, and he understands languages, but he's not been to formal training in school. His, career opportunities, social opportunities are zip. But he's very smart, and he's very determined that he wants to overthrow Spanish society in the Philippines. He wants a revolution. And he is the one who helped get Ibarra out of prison. They arrange a prison break, and they overcome the guards, and Ibarra then is set free. Tasio is sort of the wise one in here. He's reflective. He's kind of the professor in a sense. He comes from what was once a rich family, but over time they lose their money. But the one thing he keeps are his books, and he loves to read. And he becomes a mentor for Ibarra as Ibarra goes through this transition of looking for his dad and wanting to, establish a relationship with his love interest, Maria Clara, to eventually wanting to reform the Philippine society. And in the second novel, he tries to overthrow things. But he encourages people to think for themselves. He questions some basic principles of the Catholic Church, such as belief in purgatory and things of that nature. So he's a dangerous kind of a guy in society, but he doesn't act on his beliefs. He keeps them quiet. He talks to people, but he doesn't actually go out and try to confront authority like Elias does or Ibarra. Okay, so here are some plots and subplots. The main plot here is that Ibarra is trying to find out what happened to my dad while I was studying in Europe. He gets thrown into jail. While he's in jail, he dies. He goes back to the Philippines. He's trying to sort all of this out. So that's kind of the main plot. But as he tries to find the answers to these questions, all of these other issues come up, such as he feels sorry for the students in the local town, so he wants to build a school. And he finds that the clergy then begins to oppose him and cause all kinds of trouble. Padre Damaso takes great offense at the fact that they're actually going to construct this school and teach children how to read and write and things of that nature. He wants to get married to Maria Clara, but her parents oppose this union because they worry that Ibarra is too politically minded, and they worry that his relationship with her could hurt their daughters. Captain Tassio is worried. Tiago is worried about that. Maria Clara's relationship with Padre Damaso is very complicated. She wants to be a good Catholic girl. She wants to keep her father, Tiago's reputation intact. She doesn't want to disgrace her mother because her mother was impregnated by this other man. So they keep quiet about it. She's aware of the fact that Damaso is her real dad. So there's this tension going on here as well. And then we have Elias's plot to overthrow the authorities in San Diego. You know, he's working with a group of ruffians. They would like to just go in to the courthouse and take over the rifles of the guard and turn them against the Spanish colonialists and basically have them executed or thrown out of town. So there is a lot going on inside this 400-page novel. Okay, I think that you can look at Noli Me Tángere and look at it as sort of a hero's journey, okay? And if we take a look at Christopher Vogler's The Hero's Journey, we can see some ways that we can analyze this novel in terms of that rubric. First of all, there's step one, the ordinary world. We have Ibarra, who returns to the Philippines. He's living in the Philippines. He's trying to integrate back into life in the Philippines to understand it. And it's a challenge for him because he's been through a major change. His dad is no longer around. He has a call to adventure. He wants to try to honor his father. He wants to try to do the right thing. And yet he realizes that in order to do these things, he's going to be up against some major resistance. So here's the adventure. He tries to refuse. There is a refusal of the call. He realizes that he's going to face resistance from the clergy. Maybe it's easier just to walk away from it. Certainly the clergy want him to go away, but he chooses to stick with it. He has a mentor, okay? And so his mentor in this case is Tassio, who provides him with some insights into some of the weaknesses of the Catholic faith from Tassio's point of view, and some of the issues in Philippine society that will prevent him from being able to have that revolution that they think might be needed. He crosses the threshold from the ordinary world into the desired world when he begins building a school. This is extremely threatening to Damaso and the clergy, the friars in the small town, because they don't want those kids educated because they'll start thinking on their own. And he has various tests and allies and enemies. You know, he had a friend in Elias, but then of course he had his enemy. His arch enemy was Padre Damaso throughout this. We have the approach to the inmost cave. He deepens his knowledge about the corruption. He develops a very deep understanding of Philippine society after he returns from Spain. After he returns from Spain to the Philippines, and he realizes just exactly what's going wrong. And he has an ordeal. As he pays to have the school constructed in San Diego, there's an accident in the school, and what was intended to be an assassination of him winds up killing a worker. And so Father Damaso, or Padre Damaso and his friends try to do everything they can to keep the school from being built. And for a while they succeed. The reward that he receives after having gone through this journey is that he understands the depth of social corruption within the town of San Diego and probably with Philippine society in general, having been through what he has. There is a road back from his problem. He realizes that even though he is in prison, he can get out. He still lives to fight another day, and he escapes and begins his resurrection. he becomes more energized. He's ready to get out and fight the good fight to try to create social change. And his elixir that he returns with, the magic that he brings from his sojourn into the other world, the elixir he brings back are his examples, his ideas, his insights, and he tries to share these with people. All right, so what are some themes, some legacies of this novel? First of all, there is an honoring of Spanish heritage. Rizal is not anti-Spanish. He does not want to see all the white people thrown out of the Philippines. Instead, he is advocating for the Philippines to become a province of Spain. So he makes that very clear in his writing. He has respect for the Catholic Church, but he does not have respect for Spanish friars. He believes that the Philippines should be run by Filipinos, and that includes the Spanish Church, or the Catholic Church, excuse me. And as you can see, over time, the Philippines has done just exactly that. They've replaced those Spanish friars with Philippine clergy. On the left, by the way, you can see Pope Francis, who visited the Philippines in 2015. It was one of the world's largest masses. About 7 million Filipinos showed up to attend. So even though there was this type of abuse that happened with the clergy in the Philippines, the connection between Filipino people and the church is very, very strong. And Rizal was not opposed to that. He just wanted the church to clean up its act. Resisting foreign oppression, this comes through very clearly. He doesn't necessarily want to see the Spanish thrown out of the Philippines. He just wants Filipinos to be in charge and to have equal rights with Spanish people, and not to be treated as inferiors or second-class citizens. Now this is interesting. If you look on the right side, you'll see a drawing or a sketch. This was actually done by Rizal himself. And this is this is the sketch of Leonor Rivera. This was Rizal's love interest in real life. And it's said that she actually was the model for the character of Maria Clara here. Rizal had met Leonor Rivera as a child, and Rizal, he did a lot of really great things in his life, but honestly, I just have to be right out and say it. He was a womanizer. He had like about 9 different girlfriends, and he was very intimately involved with them. And one of the women that he was very close with was Leonor Rivera. And it's said that she was actually his true love. Now, he had known her since childhood, and when he was studying in Europe, they wrote to each other in correspondence quite often. And he wanted to marry her, but his family opposed the marriage because they said, you're interested in all these political things. How can you be a good husband and a father? Her family opposed a marriage between these two because they said, he's interested in publishing books like this. It's just going to make life hard for your family. So they never did get married. But it's said that the two loved each other throughout life. In the case of Rivera, she wound up getting married to another man, a British man. It was sort of an arranged marriage. But 2 days before the wedding, she took all of Rizal's love letters and burned them and put the ashes inside a silver box where she contained them, including letters that her mother had stolen and not let her see because they didn't want the relationship to prosper. She put those ashes inside a silver box. And when Leonor Rivera was pregnant with her second child with the man that she had married, the British man, she died in childbirth. Sound familiar? And it's said that as she was going through this death process, she had one final request. She asked that all of the ashes of the letters that Rizal had written to her in the silver box be put inside her casket and buried with her. Other themes, embracing races and cultures. This comes through very strongly in Rizal's book. He looked at Indios as beautiful people who deserved respect and not to be treated as second-class citizens. And he describes, for example, how Padre Damaso would go through town with his cane and beat Indios who had not been to Mass, etc. And so Rizal was very much into honoring these people of different backgrounds. Just because they didn't understand Spanish didn't make them lesser people, and that comes through in this book very clearly. Jose Rizal was arrested by the Spanish in 1896 because of publications of his book. He had volunteered to serve in the Spanish army as a doctor. At that time, they were fighting the Americans, and he had volunteered to serve as a doctor in Cuba for Spanish soldiers. And as he was getting on board a ship to go to Cuba, the Spanish authorities arrested him at the dock, and they took him to Fort Santiago in Manila. And they gave him a trial and accused him of sedition. And they presented information which had been gathered by the friars. And they used that as evidence to have him convicted. And the day after his conviction, he was marched into an open area in Santiago, Fort Santiago, and he was executed there. It's a really gripping scene. He was only 5'2", and at the time of his execution, he was wearing a black suit and a bowler hat. And he asked that he be able to face his firing squad. And they said, no, because you're a traitor, you die getting shot in the back. That way, when he would fall, his face would hit the dirt. And that's how he died. Now, the place where Rizal was executed is now known as Rizal Park in Manila. And it's a very well-known and deeply respected location in Manila, and it honors the life of Jose Rizal. And so we look at Rizal as somebody who inspires people through examples. In the novel, he presents Ibarra as a very faithful, loving, steadfast man, loyal to Maria Clara. This wasn't Jose Rizal and his relationship with his loves, but he did manage to present Filipinos with a vision for the future that would resist colonialism and take Filipinos and look at them as being equal to the Spanish, not subservient to them. And also this idea of living to serve. Jose Rizal, throughout his life, was involved in helping people with medicine. He learned how to speak several different languages. He was able to do work in terms of helping with construction, with water management, with establishing schools. He established a hospital in southern Mindanao where he was exiled for a period of time. So his life was really one of service, and that's one of the reasons why he's been elevated in the Philippines to the height where it is. So he serves as an example. And I think that this quality has been in Filipino culture for quite a bit, but this novel certainly speaks to that, and that's the desire to serve. So in the Philippines, when you go there, you're going to discover that many Filipinos view positions such as teacher, professor, nurse, doctor. These are very highly elevated and very prestigious in society, and I think that this novel also speaks to that, the need to serve. This is on the island of Mindanao, just a little personal note here. I had the opportunity to visit Jose Rizal's final home before he was packed off to Manila, to Fort Santiago, and then executed. This is a replica of his house. I think the Spanish probably burned down his original house, but you can see how he lived. It was a very simple hut, really, but you can see that it's very beautiful, and that's the surroundings. Here's on the inside. I have a very lovely tour guide who was showing me around, but you can see on the inside of the building, it's very simple. While he was, for a time, exiled to southern Mindanao, he established a school for boys in the town of Dapitan, which is a small town located way out in the middle of nowhere. But while he was there for a few years, he wasn't idle. He continued that service that I mentioned. He established a hospital and actually performed surgery in the hospital. He promoted agriculture. He encouraged farmers to do abaca cultivation, which is like a banana that can be used, the fiber, to create hemp and things of that nature. Infrastructure, he designed a municipal water system for the town of Dapitan, and they didn't have that. And he studied local flora and fauna and wrote scientific papers for publication in Europe. while he lived. So he was very active. And this little hut that you can see over here on the left, that's actually where his students stayed. He had people who came out to see him. They wanted to learn about his treatments of eyes. He was doing cataract surgery at a time when this was very new. And so people would come and stay with him and learn how to do this, and that's where they lived. So that is my report on Jose Rizal. Do you guys have any questions?
Does anyone?
You said, Nathan, he wrote another book, a follow-up book to this? What happens?
Yeah, El Filibistro, and then he's got another book where he actually wrote about the history of the Philippines before the Spanish showed up. And I'm not prepared to talk about those two. But El Filibistro basically takes Noli Me Tángere and goes to part 2. So Ibarra continues with that character, and he becomes much more of a revolutionary after having been through this. But this is the one that got him started. Thank you. Good question. Any other questions? Yeah.
Nathan, I have 2. I'd like to hear more about the elementary school version of this book. And I'd also like to know if during American occupation, if there was a Filipino author who had this kind of power of resistance through literature.
Good questions. Okay, so the elementary part of this book, this book has been very controversial, and it's been opposed by the church, for obvious reasons. They didn't like the publicity that came out of it. So the government wanted to try to promote Jose Rizal as the first Filipino as an ideal for children to emulate. But the Catholic Church had problems with it. This character, Damaso, is not a good example to follow. And, at one point, Ibarra actually throws Damaso on the ground and wants to cut his throat because of the things that he did. And so there was a lot of opposition to this novel by the church. So what the Philippines did, I have not read the handbook, but my understanding is they have created a shorter, more condensed version of this book, which takes out some of those offensive passages and presents it in a little bit more acceptable form for young minds and readers. Okay, but in the university, they get the full thing. But in elementary school, it's more of an emphasis on the good things and not so much on the criticism of the church, although there is some. And what was your second part?
I'm just curious if during American occupation, if a Filipino author rose to the prominence of Rizal to discuss colonialism and resistance to it.
That's a great question, and I don't know the answer to that. Rizal, I think, was still widely read. And, when this is a little bit off topic with the book, but it's just a fact. When the Filipinos were resisting the Spanish, the Americans came in and they said, okay, if you resist the Spanish, we will support you and we will offer you independence. And so the United States was providing Filipino guerrillas with some weaponry, but not a lot. And then as soon as Spanish forces were defeated in the Spanish-American War, the American Army and Navy showed up and they said, okay, now we're in charge. And so for the Filipinos and the resistance, it had originally been anti-Spanish. And then there was, with those guys immediately removed, that attention was able to then focus towards the Americans. And this novel would still fit in with that very much so. That desire for independence from foreign control, although the clergy part wouldn't be nearly as strong. Yeah, so there's that.
You mentioned that Rizal was not necessarily an overthrow the government type supporter. So then how does this book fit into their revolution or their search for independence when they were in fact trying to get rid of first the Spanish, but then the Americans?
In this book, he's not advocating that, but there's a part 2. And that's a little bit different because over a period of time, he becomes radicalized. And so that becomes much more prominent in it. What I think is really sad is that, his basic arguments here were that he wanted Filipinos just to be treated equally and with respect. And he wanted the Philippines to be a province of Spain and Spain to be, the mother country. And for the Spanish, that was unacceptable. The ideas of Filipinos would be equal to the Spanish was something they just couldn't, and to me just seemed so tragic. And that just that simple request was more than they would be willing to offer. So yeah.
Any other questions? All right. Thank you very much, Nathan.
Thank you very much for coming.